Salvete Audentes. My name is Draco, and this is Antiqua Culina, the show where I recreate ancient recipes and discuss their ingredients and history. As usual, sources are in the description, but first, Alebatum de Vesta. For today's recipe, we have a dish classical the world over by Deus. Not the puns again. Pottage, which, as the name suggests, means things slow cooked in a pot. Specifically today, we're taking a look at Hypotrima, or is it Hypotrima? Hypotrima? Regardless, this dish, Hypotrima, is our iconic slow-cooked roast, but with a wide variety of ingredients meant to add a distinctly sweet flavor profile. Here is the recipe as appears in the De Re Caquinaria, with translation provided. As usual, I provide my personal translation and the Veiling translation seen on the Penelope U Chicago website. It seems I have a lot of explaining to do. As you see, this recipe calls for 6, count them, 6 different ingredients that add sweetness to the dish. I guess if you're an Italian peasant and want something sweet, you go all out. Anyways, what even are some of these? Well, cariotam is date syrup, essentially distilled date juice, extracted after the dates are soaked in boiling water to dissolve their sugars, available at your local Middle Eastern ethnic store or online given current circumstances. I could find no direct reference to sweet cheese, but I expect it's a tangy cheese like feta. As for lovage, it's an herb somewhere between parsley and celery leaf. As for why I suspect, nay, no, Hypotrima is a peasant dish, is that when your goal is fine dining, literally anything is more elegant than, sticking a bunch of ingredients in a pot and letting them boil until cooked. To that end, let's stick a bunch of ingredients in a pot and slow cook them. Nota bene, this recipe makes a lot of food. For this recipe, you'll need 10 ounces of any type of bean, 10 ounces any other type of bean, some ounce of animal product, I'm using chicken thighs, 2 large handfuls of parsley, and 3 ounces of feta or goat cheese, each reserved till the end of cooking, 1/4 cup pine nuts or walnuts crushed, 1 teaspoon dried mint, ground, 1 tablespoon black pepper, 2 bay leaves, 2 tablespoons pseudogarum, 1 cup of wine, 1/8 cup vinegar, 1/4 cup olive oil, 1 cup grape juice, 1/3 cup raisins, 2 tablespoons date syrup, and 2 tablespoons honey. Oh, and like 10 cups of water, by Deus. To begin, take the biggest pot you have, yes, that one, and start by drizzling some of your olive oil in, then browning whatever meat you're using. I'm using my chicken thighs. Note to self, clean this up in post. There we go. Once the chicken has been browned, add the water and all other ingredients and bring to a boil. If you want a more pleasant experience after the meal, I recommend soaking the beans overnight beforehand. Again, this is a very simple procedure. Now, all that's left to do is wait for about 4 hours to let the beans cook thoroughly and have the bones or meat turn the water into stock. Every so often, you should taste the brew and add salt if needed. While that's cooking, time to discuss protein and sweetness. The agricultural products of a society greatly reflect the caloric and economic needs of its people. For instance, if you find yourself repeatedly starved of infrastructure or economic opportunity, you may very well adopt a certain crop monoculture that makes you incredibly vulnerable to, let's say, a novel pathogen that wipes out your crops. Looking at you, Hibernia. Luckily for Roman Italy, much evidence from the 1st through 1st centuries show an emphasis on crop polyculture, even on the massive latifunda. To this end, due to commercial consolidations in this time period and a little thing called economies of scale, meat consumption increased drastically throughout Italy, albeit we are not sure by quite how much. Although during this time period, beef intake increased, with pork intake increasing later in antiquity. Regardless, increased protein means increased health and life expectancy, which is always a good thing. The importation of some of the goods in this recipe, namely pepper, dates, and honey, also speak towards economic prosperity. Yes, beekeeping has been established by this time. See Virgil's Georgics for examples, but honey would still be better imported than grown locally. Remember those crop polycultures? Well, they were also a sign of status to the Roman elite. Growing grain and pork? How pedestrian. I grow grapes, cabbage, and wild strawberries. Note that Cato the Elder does actually claim to grow wild strawberries in his De Agricultura. The one problem with this gentleman grower aesthetic is when your agricultural goods, namely grapes, are considered the root cause of moral degeneracy. How exactly do you square that? That is a story for another time, a conflict which the old guard of Roman society ultimately lost out on. Now, back to the Hypotrima. Beans are done when they smash easily against the pot side with a spoon. Time for a taste. Huh. And after all that, it's a Roman beans recipe with a very similar flavor profile to Boston baked beans. Don't use chickpeas, as they don't really get soft when being boiled. I would make this recipe again, but I would not have the chicken in it for most of the time so it doesn't completely fall apart. 6 out of 10. In conclusion, to the Cohen Fellowship who provides me with the funds to make these videos, many thanks.